Inside Black and Gold from I'm in my water boil advisory house in Metry while Jeff is living the dream in the city. We are here to bring you the latest on the Saints, some new offensive coordinator update. We'll get into mock drafts already and even a little Taysom Hill talk. How you doing, Jeff?
I'm doing good. Yeah, I can still drink my tap water. I mean, it's still poisoning me probably, right? But I can drink it without heating it up first. So I guess that's an improvement over your situation. But yeah, we're just going to get, this first segment, we're just going to get into kind of the latest offensive coordinator updates. There's only a couple of them. And then, yeah, we're going to use the second segment to go through your mock draft, your initial mock draft, final segment to go through my initial mock draft. You're going to talk it out, figure it out, right? Go through what we think is, this is kind of the placeholder one where I make a pick based on the idea of a thing. And I just pick a player that I haven't really had a ton of time to go through the film yet or scout yet. And then we have the Senior Bowl next week. So that'll kind of be a good jumping off point into that. But yeah, first things first. So one, there's been a couple more offensive coordinator interviews that have come out since we last spoke. 3 were reported previously. So one was Ronald Curry, which we all kind of expected, the internal candidate. It would have been weird if they didn't interview him. Obviously, he's a serious option. And it's really a question of, do you want to rebuild a lot of it, or do you want to stick with a good chunk of what you've done and maybe refresh it? Because that would be the Ronald Curry hire, would be a sign that you're not overhauling the offense significantly. And that's a big question, is how much do you want to change? The others, which are not a surprise, and they have come out now because you're talking about teams that played into the divisional round, right? So you have the 49ers, you have Brian Griese, who's their quarterbacks coach under Kyle Shanahan, Clint Kubiak, son of Gary Kubiak, Clint with a K, who is the 49ers pass game coordinator, pass game specialist, whatever their title is, right? So those are 3 that got reported earlier this week. And then the most recent one literally just came out minutes before we came on here, which is Steelers. Was it their offensive coordinator? Their interim offensive coordinator?
Quarterbacks coach.
Steelers quarterbacks coach. Yeah, sorry. Steelers quarterbacks coach Mike Sullivan, who's interesting because he doesn't really check the boxes of some of these other guys that you have interviewed. And maybe this is a sign of the Saints starting to broaden their search a little bit outside of the McVay Shanahan guys, because Mike Sullivan, while he does check my box of being a former offensive coordinator, doesn't have any of that experience crossing over with Sean McVay or Kyle Shanahan outside of crossing paths with Clint Kubiak in Denver. But he was the offensive coordinator for the Giants back in the 2015-2016 season. That was the Ben McAdoo coach season for the Giants, season plus, which is a really hilarious error when you look at it, because Ben McAdoo lost his job after trying to bench Eli Manning for Geno Smith. And at the time, everyone was like, you're crazy. Geno Smith, he's not a starting quarterback in the NFL. What are you doing? Put Davis Webb in, who was their 3rd round pick that year. And the reaction was so loud that the front office was like, you know what? Never mind. We're going to fire Ben. Eli, you go back in. We're gonna start you the rest of the year. Geno, kick rocks. And then you moved on. Eventually you got Daniel Jones. He took over for Eli Manning the next season. Now Geno Smith is out in Seattle starting, which is like, if you're Ben McAdoo, you must be looking at that and being like, well, I guess, yeah, what I think I was right. I think that's anyway. But yeah, Mike Sullivan, his biggest, credential is being the offensive coordinator for the Giants for a period of time. He was also their wide receivers coach. I think he was a quarterbacks coach at one point. So it's an interesting one, because again, it doesn't check the boxes of the guys that you like, the Zach Robinsons and the Dan Pitchers and these guys, right?
And yeah, with the Pittsburgh gig, he did take over play calling once Matt Canada got canned.
Matt canned. Yeah. Well, that's what we were joking about. It was like, I don't mind that they're interviewing Mike Sullivan, as long as they don't even like take a second look at Matt Canada. Like, I don't even want to, like, if like we talk about guys getting coaching opportunities, Arthur Smith is another guy who there's reports that he's getting a lot of interest in offensive coordinator searches. And it's not surprising to me, because there's so many available. And, we talked about this. You kind of laughed it off, but at the same time, it's like he was a head coach because he was a good offensive coordinator, right? Like, even if you complain about Dennis Allen as a head coach, I think we can all agree that he could fall back and still be a good defensive coordinator, right? Josh McDaniels is the same thing. Like, he is getting head coaching jobs because he's a good offensive coordinator. Now, those two things don't always even out, which means being a good offensive coordinator and being a good head coach. But you can certainly fall back and be an offensive coordinator that with success, right? Look at Dan Quinn, right? Dan Quinn he's been so good with the Cowboys that everyone wants him, but he won't leave the Cowboys. And I do think it's interesting, but it's going to be, I do wonder, you look at Shane Waldron taking the job with the Bears, and one of the questions going to be, it's not whether a coach will come coach the Saints offense. They'll find someone that's willing to do it. It's going to be when you are in a bidding war with another team. For instance, Dan Pitcher, who Brian Callahan got hired to go coach the Titans, right? He's their head coach now. So do the Bengals elevate Dan Pitcher? And now you're competing with the Bengals for a guy you might want, right? Like that becomes difficult because you're holding that scenario up to against the Saints, and you're not necessarily saying, will they come coach the Saints? Sure, but will they come coach the Saints when this other option is available and they could choose that instead? That's the question that's going to come up, and I think that as gets more and more protracted, you have to ask, is that happening more often than not? And is that how you end up with a guy like Arthur Smith, even though he's probably still a little salty about how that season ended?
I'd be kind of interested in his first meeting in the Saints building with Jameis in the room.
I don't think Jameis would be in the room.
I'm just saying, I don't think Arthur Smith will be either. It would just be funny.
No, I don't think Arthur Smith's going to get the job. I just think there's a reason that he will get interest. Of course he will. Like, just because you failed as a head coach doesn't mean teams scratch you off their list and say, oh, he's hopeless. I think a team that wants to revitalize their run game and rededicate themselves to the run game
might go back to Tennessee.
Interest in Arthur Smith, right? The Titans were a much better offense when he was there.
Right.
I mean, Derrick Henry was, first people forget the first few years of Derrick Henry's career, he wasn't good. He was still the same guy. So why wasn't he good? Well, he paired with Arthur Smith, and they created a scheme, and they improved, and they dedicated themselves to the run game, and he was a perennial All-Pro guy, and now I think he's kind of reached that point Derrick Henry has where he's kind of falling off a little bit. But no, I think it's interesting, and that kind of leads into one of my biggest questions, like whenever the Saints hire a guy, is going to be, okay, how do you plan to incorporate Taysom Hill into this offense? Because, I've seen people say, well, they should cut him. They should trade him. You're not cutting him. You're not trading him, because that would cost you $16 million in dead money to cut Taysom or trade Taysom this offseason. Maybe next year. It's possible. And you could potentially go the route of making him a post-June 1 cut or trade, which would, I think, be $5 million this year, and that would push $11 million of the dead cap to next year. But that's not better. It just makes your operational cost this year a little simpler. So I think you have to go in with the idea that Taysom is on your offense, and the question is, how are you going to use him? Because I think Taysom has been used these last 2 years in terms of you're trying to find ways, but I don't think you've been very creative with how you're using him in terms of like the Taysom runs. Like, you've been using him more as a pass catcher, and I have some numbers here, but I just don't think that this past season specifically, you saw the level of creativity within that Taysom offense that you probably want to see.
Yeah, for me, the problem definitely, I want more usage out of Taysom. I just don't feel like it's been consistent enough. There's times in games he just disappears.
Well, see, no, I disagree with that, because I think you have used Taysom more these last 2 years. He disappears because you're only using him in these incredibly predictable ways, and when those get stopped, what do? Right? You don't have a counter. Like, 95% of the time, you see Taysom in the backfield with Derek Carr on the sideline, and the entire plan is, okay, we have an extra blocker, and we're going to see if we can block all these guys, and Taysom can find a hole. That's the offense. Like, you can go left or right. You can do a few things out of it, but it's pretty straightforward. It's not, you would not call that creative, right? No, and so, one of the things, and I've said this, we've talked about this before, is why don't you see plays where Derek Carr is set to this is off to in wide, right? You saw it last year with Andy Dalton.
Drew Brees would do that.
Drew Brees would do that, right? And I know that people are like, well, he's not really drawing any attention over there, but that's not the point. The point is there should be scenarios where you call 2 plays, and one is a check to if they show this look, we are checking to a Taysom Hill run. The quarterback is splitting out wide, and we are running Taysom Hill against a light look or against this personnel that we don't believe can stop him, even without that extra blocker. And you don't have that. And the evidence is pretty clear because you can look up like where. So if you go in Pro Football Focus, you can look at snaps by position. So it actually saves a lot of time in terms of going back and watching every single Taysom Hill run, which can be hard to parse out. And so this past season, Derek Carr, he started 17 games. He missed like a full game when you combine all of the second halves that he got hurt in. So you could say 16 games total he was in for. He was split out wide 8 times all season long.
I'm surprised it's that many.
Well, go back to in that. That's not necessarily. It's like sometimes it's Alvin Kamara, or sometimes you do a double reverse handoff or whatever. So it's not always like the same as him being out wide. But if you go back to last year with Andy Dalton, they did it. Let's see, Andy Dalton in 2022, 33 times. He started 14 games. They did it 33 times that he was split out wide. And it's not always a run play. There was a long pass to get to Rashid Shaheed in the win over the Falcons. You know who was standing at the bottom of the screen, not getting any attention? Andy Dalton, right? Taysom Hill found Rashid Shaheed for like a 70-yard touchdown or a 60-yard touchdown. Like it's not about the numbers per se. It's about keeping the defense off balance and forcing them to adjust and then attacking what weakness they decide to show. Go back, and it's hard to kind of gauge in terms of snap count from like 2020 and 2021 because Taysom started several games each of those seasons. So his snaps at quarterback are a lot higher, and it's hard to kind of get a good measuring stick. In 2020, when Drew Brees started 12 games, he was split out 18 times. And I think you're dealing with an injury. You want to be careful just in case like something weird happens. So you're not getting as creative with him. But you go back to 2018, which is the last time you didn't have a quarterback miss 4 to 5 games in a year. Drew Brees in 16 starts was split out wide 55 times.
Wow.
55. That's Drew Brees.
Yeah.
And this was back when your offense was humming. Right? That was the NFC Championship year.
Yeah.
So what happened? What's changed? Why aren't you doing that anymore? I think to me that's just an underlying sign of like the lack of creativity in this offense, and because you have the most versatile player in the NFL, but you're only using him in incredibly predictable ways. And especially now that you can use him more as a threat downfield, I think that he's shown that he can be a pass catcher and run these routes, and instead of forcing them to respect him as a route runner and as a pass catcher, and then using that to your advantage because they're going to be in nickel and dime looks, you don't do it at all. And so like I'm not saying like the new offensive coordinator, his plan for Taysom Hill is going to be what gets him the job or doesn't get him the job, but that's going to be one of my biggest questions of like, how exactly do you intend to use Taysom Hill? Because not a lot of guys are walking through the door with experience in that type, with that level of gadget type plays in your offense. Like no other team does it. There's no other Taysom Hill. So yeah.
Yeah. What's really curious to me is like, obviously we've seen a decrease in his use on special teams. He's not totally not, doing that anymore. But I figured with the, less special teams work, he'd be getting more involved in the offense. And I just don't feel like that has been the case for Taysom.
Why? I don't think he's been used less on special teams. What do you mean?
I just felt like he was used more, obviously, as your gunner or, trying to be a block, block a punt. And I just don't feel like he's used as much there anymore.
I disagree with that. So this year,
okay.
Kick coverage, he's not used on kick coverage as much, but kick return 23, 71, 65, 140, 163, 164. He got 164 snaps on special teams this year in 2023. Last year he got 145, 158, 160, 163. So about the same. 2021. That's hard because, again, these are seasons where, so the seasons that he started games at quarterback, his numbers will be down. But let's go back to like 2018. And like even 2019 would be tough because when Teddy Bridgewater was a starting quarterback, he was the backup and that limited his usage, if you remember. But let's see, 2018, 103, 175. Yeah, this season he got, about 250. But I mean, I think you are still using him on special teams significantly, right? Like he's in every punt. He's the personal protector on punts. He's out there in the field goal block. So I don't know. I don't think that his usage has gone down as a special teamer.
Yeah, I don't know. For whatever reason, it definitely felt that way to me. I don't know. I'm used to seeing Taysom come in and making a play on special teams, and I guess that really hasn't stood out for me the past couple years.
Well, one of my issues is that you've never used him as for a fake. He's in there on every single punt. I don't think you've used him for one fake since that time against the 49ers where he threw. And remember, there was the whole like, is it holding or is it not holding?
Right.
That's the last time I remember a fake. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's one of the perks of having him there is like you're always threatening to run a fake, and they just never have anyway. But like one of the reasons that leaving Taysom on the field, leaving Derek on the field when you run him in some of those sets is like, okay, so you don't have to sub, right? Like you don't have to project what you're doing. And then you can run multiple plays against looks that you like, right? Like if you have Derek on the sideline, then the only way to get him back on the field is to sub, obviously, which allows the other team to match personnel. If you have both of those guys on the field and you like that first look to run against and you do it and it works, you can do it again, or you can go back and run a play with Derek Carr under center and then hit him again with that run. You can run 3 plays in a row without substituting and they can't match. So you're able, it's like, I just want to see them use Taysom the way that you used to use Taysom. Like you go back to 2018 and it just seemed like there was a plan, and now that plan is, well, let's hit him with a hammer again.
It definitely seems that they treat him a little with kid gloves too. I don't know if they're worried about injury with him, obviously, because of how he's used. You do have to consider that to some extent. But yeah, I'm not saying you give him 20 carries a game. But like one of the reasons he takes such high impact on these runs is because he's constantly running into a brick wall. Yeah.
Like he should be able to break runs against safeties, not Sam linebackers, and that's my biggest frustration. So that's it. That's all I really have. But that's like one of the questions I have, because it's one of the unique things about the Saints offense that if a guy comes in and says like, I want to change this and do something else entirely, you need to have a good reason. So we'll see. But yeah, that's all I have on the offensive coordinator search. And, we're getting into Senior Bowl time. I imagine you're going to want to be making a hire soon, but who knows? That's when you get into the area of, well, I have 2 offers. Which one do I want to take? And do you get into a bidding war? And is Mickey kind of sending Gail a text being like, hey, can we up this guy's salary by another $500,000? And
overall though, I think a lot of people have been really down on the Saints situation on offense, and if you really look at it, it's not that bad of a scenario in my opinion when you have a Derek Carr, Alvin Kamara, Chris Olave in the mix. You mentioned Taysom Hill, the list goes on and on. Obviously I think the offensive line kind of needs an overhaul, but other than that, there's still plenty of weapons to get to on this offense.
No, it's not the worst situation by any stretch. Like there are worse situations to go to. You have supportive ownership, right? You have an offense that you can control. Like that's one of the reasons that I think the Saints would have. I don't know if it would be easier to hire an offensive coordinator if you're not a play calling offensive coordinator, right? Like so you can say you are the rock star of this offense.
Right.
And, why did Eric Bieniemy leave Kansas City to go coach the offense in Washington so he could be the full-time offensive coordinator there? Because every year he would go into these head coaching interviews and they'd be like, you didn't even call your own plays. So I think there is some attractiveness there where if in another situation it might not be as, it's like why did Ryan Nielsen leave New Orleans? He was already a defensive coordinator, so why did he leave? Because he got to be a defensive coordinator on Arthur Smith's staff, and it went well. Even though his head coach got fired, he was able to snag a job very quickly with a playoff caliber Jacksonville team that obviously fell off the face of the earth late in the season, but it's still I think is going to be an attractive pick to get back to the postseason next year. So like this idea, like DA being maybe a lame duck coach, if he gets fired this season, it's not helpful, but it's not disqualifying in a lot of ways. It's just going to come down to what offers are they considering, like again, like Shane Waldron, if it came down to the Saints and the Bears, the team with the number 1 overall pick, and you can be like, do you want Caleb Williams? Because he's yours if you want him. That's a pretty good sales pitch.
Right.
But not every team has that, what about the Titans? They got to hire an offensive coordinator for Brian Callahan, but he's probably going to be the play calling offensive coordinator. So is that better? Tennessee, right? Like I don't think they have a ton of weapons. They don't really have an established quarterback. Maybe you go with Will Levis, you feel good about him. I don't know. So yeah, I think the Saints will be fine. It's just a question of how long does this take? How dragged out does it get? And then does it impact some of your offseason decision making? So we'll see over the next couple of weeks how quickly this goes. But I think, if it's, I do think you're kind of getting it. I think you had an A pool, which is the coaches you could interview back when your season ended. Right. And now you're getting into the B pool, which is the coaches you can interview now that their season has ended. And then a few more names, like Mike Sullivan was a guy you could have interviewed back then because the Steelers were out after the wild card round. But you waited until now, and so I think that's a sign that some of the names have come off your board, and you're broadening your search. And the funny thing is, like, I want to come out with I have a whole offseason plan that I've been waiting to kind of throw out, but I do want to wait to see who the offensive coordinator is going to be before, like, I finalize that plan, because that's going to impact it, right? It's got to.
Yeah, for sure. And you brought up the Senior Bowl, and obviously with that cranking up next week, it is going to be interesting. Are they going to get somebody in place for that event?
It's funny. I don't think the the offensive coordinator is as important in that as Jeff Ireland is.
Right. I got you there.
And I don't know, have the Chargers hired a GM?
That's a good question.
No, so I don't think they have. So I got confused because the Raiders hired Tom Telesco, who was the Chargers GM. That's why I was kind of crossing wires in my head. So to me, that's a big difference. If suddenly your scouting director doesn't work for you anymore, so if Jeff Ireland does leave, is it Michael Parrington? Who do you put into that role? Because I think that's a significant difference in terms of your Senior Bowl exploits, because you're getting a look, but it's it's going to be position coaches, there's going to be scouts who are there, and you can that information is going to be available. You can watch that stuff back, but like your scouting director is in charge of all of it, so that kind of leaves you in limbo. But yeah, I mean, I think you would like to have him in place, but I don't think you have to.
Right. It's not like this desperate need of, oh my gosh, we need this guy in Mobile next week.
You're not going to hire someone you're not 100% sold on just to have him in place.
Yeah.
It's kind of what I'm saying. Now, if you do have like a home run hire and you feel like you got it, then by all means get it done as quickly as possible. But I think, I kind of, the indication to me is you don't have that yet.
It's weird to me. You see obviously some meetings happening, and then you see some are just Zoom calls. So I wonder what's the deal with that. Is it just because of somebody's maybe schedule, or just curious on how that works out? What deems an in-person visit and what is just a Zoom call?
That's a good question. I don't know. But I do think scheduling has a lot to do with it, right? Like,
I would imagine.
I think there's instances where you're kind of testing the waters, and then if it's something you do want to move on, that's when you get the second interview and it is more in person, or if there's someone that you feel really good about and you just bring them in for the first time. But yeah, I mean, I think Zoom is something that became a thing over COVID, like during COVID, and now it's just like sometimes it's just more convenient, particularly if it's a coach that is still, like a Clint Kubiak, right, who is still in dealing with playoff game this weekend, right? I think that makes it a little bit more suitable for Zoom rather than asking this guy to fly all the way to New Orleans, or you go out to Santa Clara randomly on a Tuesday just to talk to a guy who may or may not be even interested in your job, or at least like to the point that it's worth, jamming up everybody's week.
That case, Zoom's a nice feeler out to see what vibe you get from him.
Yeah. Now, a head coach interview, I think, is a little more intensive.
Right.
And so that's a little bit bigger of a question for me. But all right, let's wrap up this segment, and we'll come back and we'll get into the mock drafts that we teased earlier. We're going to start with Steve's, which is only a first-round mock draft, and we're going to go into mine in the final segment, which is a 2-round mock draft. And trust me when I say I know very little about these second-round prospects. We are way too early in the process, but I think there's some interesting decisions we can get into. So this is Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He is Steve Geller. We will be right back. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. I am Jeff Nowak. He is Steve Geller, and we are going to get into the mock drafts. And so hold on while I share my screen here and have it popped up. If you're listening to this and you want to see the actual board, it's displayed up to our left here. I'm going to go through all of these picks and kind of identify, okay, what's weird? What do we think is realistic? What's not? We use Pro Football Focus. So, one of the themes of Pro Football Focus is clearly not a huge Jaden Daniels fan in terms of whatever algorithm they're using. Because in both of these mock drafts, he fell not just out of the top 3, but well out of the top 3.
I joke with you when I fired it up the first time, boom, pick number 14, Jaden Daniels was still on the board. I'm like, I can't do this.
Yeah, it's weird because like the idea that one of the reasons that I like to do these mock drafts is not necessarily to be right every time or to
but you get like a bubble of like players that are available.
Yeah, it's just to kind of make decisions, and every time it's a little different. And so he's like, well, I kind of want an offensive tackle, but this guy's here. But like leaving it as Jaden Daniels, like, of course, if Jaden Daniels got to 14, you would draft Jaden Daniels. Like that's not even worth talking about. But he's not going to get to 14. And if he does, that means that he probably like broke his leg at the combine or something. Like we don't need to go through that. Maybe, but it is going to be interesting. And over the course of the next month, it's like at this point last year, I think our first mock draft, I was able to get Anthony Richardson at 22.
Okay.
And I was like, and I was like, yeah, of course I'm taking Anthony Richardson at 22. He ended up going what, number 4? So yeah, I mean, it's kind of annoying. So we redid it and he went in a more reasonable spot. But so one of the interesting things in this mock is Drake May went number 1 overall over Caleb Williams. And I do think it's going to be interesting because you're talking about a team like last year. I think midway through the process, I was like, I think CJ Stroud is the number 1 overall pick. And I would be taking CJ Stroud, but everyone was like, nah, it's going to be Bryce Young. And the Panthers went with Bryce Young, but that doesn't mean it's the right pick just because it's the popular pick. And you can make the same argument about Caleb Williams. Like, did his teammates go to his birthday party? Do we know?
That's a great question. But yeah, with Caleb, I've even seen like people questioning, could Jaden Daniels even be that number 1 spot? But PFF does not believe that.
No, PFF is clearly, and it is. That's why I think maybe we do next time. We'll use a different service to see if maybe these boards vary. But yeah, I mean, Caleb Williams, there's going to be some weirdos out there like, hey, buddy, paints his nails. He does paint his nails. It's just kind of, self-expression, I guess. I think it was
that gets a demerit. Knock him down the board.
Yeah, basically, I kind of have a rule. If Cole Beasley doesn't like something, it's probably the side you don't want to be on, right? Like if I see Cole Beasley on Twitter being like, "Oh, what a weirdo," I'm like, "Yeah, this is a good safe place to be." Is opposite of whatever Cole Beasley is arguing for.
Sounds like me and my NFL picks.
Yeah, so we'll see. I bet Cole Beasley wouldn't draft Caleb Williams number 1 overall because he's a weirdo. Anyway. So yeah, Drake May number 1, Caleb Williams number 2. I think most people agree that that's going to be 1 and 2, and in large part because I think Washington really needs a quarterback. The thing that doesn't make sense to me here is the Patriots not taking a quarterback.
Right. Who the hell's throwing to Marvin Harrison Jr., right?
Yeah, like you're going with Mac Jones? No, I'm sorry. I think it's more likely that the Bears trade down to number 3 if they're not taking Caleb Williams than take Drake May. Which would make a ton of sense. They would net a bunch of assets, and then they could take Marvin Harrison Jr. Patriots could go get Caleb Williams for their new quarterback, whoever it is. Or I'm sorry, Gerard Mayo's their new quarterback. I'm sorry, their new head coach.
Oh, yeah.
So like, I don't think this is how it's going to go. Even if Drake May is the first quarterback off the board, I don't think it's going to be the Bears picking them, but we're not doing trades. Either way, I think the first 4 picks are interesting. And number 4, you have Malik Neighbors from LSU going off the board, which, that's pretty high too. But there's a couple interesting wide receivers in this draft.
Arizona, what's his name? The QB there would love to have another weapon at wide receiver, like a Malik Neighbors. And from all things, I guess we can glean from things is they're going to stick with
Kyler Murray.
What's his? Kyler Murray. Thank you, Mr. Call of Duty at quarterback over there.
He had a really good finish to the season,
right?
And he was the number 1 overall pick. Like you paid him a ton of money. They're going to want to stick with him if they can. If it's not a complete teardown, and I think they had a decent finish to the season. Relative, like they always knew that it was going to be a really tough start with Kyler not being out there. So I don't think that they're going to hold that against him. And
Arizona was kind of like the Texans, whereas the fact that they were a pesky little team that they didn't quit on games and was always a problem.
Yeah, Jonathan Gannon, first year head coach, he had him playing hard. Like you can't look at that team and say they didn't play hard. I think they were at a talent deficit, and so it would make sense to get Kyler Murray that weapon and Malik Neighbors. So number 5, Brock Bowers, first tight end off the board.
Pretty high.
I still, it's hard for me to really believe that a tight end's going to go in the top 5, but I guess if there was ever one, it would be Brock Bowers. Joe Alt from Notre Dame, which sounds like a keyboard shortcut.
Right.
He's the first tackle off the board. And then this is one that, I think every year, I think people get a little overhyped about wide receivers and they have them way high up the board and then they end up dropping a little bit. I feel like Rome Odunze is going to be like, I don't know. Maybe I just don't know Odunze enough. Maybe I didn't watch him enough, but when I watched him play, I didn't see a guy who was a top 10 NFL draft pick. And like, that's not to say I don't like Rome Odunze a lot, but you're talking about number 6 overall for a guy who played in the Pac-12 and didn't win the Biletnikoff, or did he win the Biletnikoff? Who won the Biletnikoff? Oh, Marvin Harrison Jr. won it. Like, I don't know. Like, to me, that's real high. Number 7 overall for a guy who you could say it's like, well, who made the receiver? Was it Michael Penix? Did he make Odunze look better than he was against Pac-12 competition? Maybe. I don't know. I just think like Justin Jefferson was a number 22 overall pick. Yeah, that's number 7 for a wide receiver feels really high to me.
No, I agree with you there. I don't think it's anything that mind-blowing, eye-popping that he does that really stands out to garner that high of a pick.
I mean, he's like I think he's Keenan Allen in the NFL, right? Like he's that type of receiver. He is big. He's 6'3", right? He's 216. Maybe I have a Pac-12 bias. That's probably what's going on. But we'll see. Keep him going down. So this is where Jaden Daniels goes.
He goes
number 8 to the Falcons. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I saw that, and I'm like, of course, that's what happens in my mock draft. I would hate to see it, obviously. Makes a ton of sense for Atlanta, though.
Oh, yeah. This is a steal for Atlanta.
Absolutely.
It makes me wonder if this is a scenario. Like, I don't want to see the Saints trade up because I don't think they're in a position where they should feel like trading up is the best option. But if the Titans aren't sold on a wide receiver here, and that's who they're looking at, and they think we can trade down and still get this guy, maybe the Saints try to jump. Like, the Saints aren't going to trade with the Falcons, but could they jump the Falcons? Like, this is the range where I consider it. I still don't think it's likely, but this is the range where I'm like, could I go up to 7? What do I have to give up to get to 7 and get Jaden? And I don't know. I don't know how much the Saints like Jaden Daniels, but I think you should.
I don't know if he would be available at 7, but if there
I
was
still don't think he's getting out of the top 3.
Right, exactly. But if there was somebody they were that interested in, I could see, leapfrogging the Falcons and, pulling one over on them would make a lot of sense. I just don't know what you're moving up to get.
And it is interesting because, if the Bears don't want to take a quarterback and they trade down to number 3, so you do have those top 2 go. But so if the Bears don't take a quarterback, who's the next team that could take a quarterback? I think the Cardinals are fine with Kyler. The Chargers aren't drafting a quarterback. They got Herbert. Right. The Giants, how sold are you on Daniel Jones? I think that's maybe number 6 is where they picked Daniel Jones. So clearly, that's not something outside their wheelhouse, but it was a different GM at that point. It was Gettleman. So I mean, realistically, if no one trades up, then I could see him getting to 8. I have a hard time seeing him getting past, the Jets at 10.
Right.
So, or even the Falcons at 8. I think that's probably if Jaden Daniels dropped to 8 and the Falcons didn't take him, I would just be like, lose all faith in that organization.
It'd be like when even if they, I've seen the rumors already, they're gonna, sign Belichick and pair him up with the Kirk Cousins. You still need your quarterback in the future because Cousins is up there in age.
Yeah, and I mean the Falcons have assets. Like they're not a team that's traded a bunch of future picks, so they'll be able to add pieces too, and they're gonna have a high second rounder. So we'll see. Number 9, Cooper DeJean, taking the Jason Sehorn mantle of white cornerbacks.
Right.
Which I don't know. Where was Jason Sehorn drafted? I'm curious.
I don't know, but I was surprised to see DeJean that high.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't watch a ton of Iowa, but Iowa was one of those teams that played defense and did nothing else. So we'll see. I mean, it's impressive for him. Rashard Mendenhall would have some thoughts probably. Based, but anyway, Taliesin Fuaga to the Jets at number 10. This is where the offensive tackles start coming off the board. And I think it's, if you're not trading up for a quarterback, but you are feeling like, okay, you've already seen one offensive tackle come off the board, 10 and 11, you're kind of feeling like, man, I really like one of these two guys. And I desperately need a tackle to rebuild my tackle depth. Maybe this is where you swing a trade, because it's going to cost you, but it's not going to cost you that much to go up from 14 to maybe 10.
Right. You could manage that.
So, and if you don't feel like that guy's going to get to you, Dallas Turner, Alabama edge rusher at 12 to the Broncos. So the other offensive tackle, I guess I'll try to say his name is Olamayiwa Fashanu out of Penn State. Then
10-11 back-to-back tough names.
Yeah. Jerzon Newton, interior defensive lineman from Illinois. And then we get to number 14. So dun, 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 dun. What is the song?
Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah, there you go. Well, who do you pick?
With the 14th overall pick in the draft, the New Orleans Saints select Jared Verse out of Florida State, 6'4", 260. Hopefully bringing that mean back to that defensive line that needs help there. Obviously, getting to the quarterback. We know Cam's getting up in age. So many failed attempts at another edge rusher. Hopefully, Verse is the man and not from a school that everyone's scratching their head going, from where?
Yeah, the only problem I have with this pick is that he's not out of like South Central Indiana by way of Hartford or like something like that. Like it's like, oh, Florida State. What are you talking about? We know too much about him.
Yeah.
No, I can't hate this pick. If the Saints ended up, we did the positions of need thing and the other day, and I put edge rusher in green just because you have a lot of names and you just need them to deliver. I still wouldn't. I would be completely fine if they took an edge rusher at number 14 because, man, I would love to see, because for a couple reasons. One, he's the number 2 edge rusher off the board, right? You're not talking about the 4th or 5th rated guy. This would be either your 1st or 2nd rated edge rusher. And you're just saying, you know what? I'm tired of these experiments. I'm tired of these projects. We're going to get a blue chip defensive end and have him
exactly
go
my thinking.
And like you could say, yeah, I mean, you really still want to see something out of Peyton Turner. You feel good about Carl Granderson developing over time, but I would still be perfectly fine with this. And And so you did see those tackles come off the board, right? And that's kind of where if one of these tackles got to you, I would probably feel differently. I don't think you're going to draft a cornerback in the first. You saw, Latu at UCLA. A lot of tough names in this draft.
Sure.
Terry Arnold, cornerback out of Alabama, goes to the Colts. And then we can kind of go through some of the other names here. But no, I can't hate that pick.
No, you mentioned tackle. Coming off a few picks later was Latham from Alabama, who was a consideration.
Yeah, J.C. Latham. He went 18 to the Bengals. I don't know. I'm not sold on him. Kool-Aid McKinstry, another cornerback. I don't think you're taking a cornerback in the first round.
I agree.
I don't think this is the year you do it. Nate Wiggins out of Clemson went to the Jags at 17. Another tackle, Amarius Mims, went to Georgia. Went to Pittsburgh out of Georgia. Troy Franklin, the wide receiver out of Oregon, went to the Dolphins. Braylon Trice. He's another edge rusher I've seen people looking at for the Saints. Brian Thomas Jr. No, Mel Kiper put out a mock draft and had Brian Thomas Jr. going to the Saints at 14. Thought that was a bit high.
Wow. Yeah,
I also don't see see the Saints as particularly wide receiver needy right now. I think that you're going to see a lot more mock drafts put wide receiver on the Saints because I don't think they have much respect for Rashid Shaheed or A.T. Perry, but I think internally there is a lot of respect for Rashid Shaheed and A.T. Perry. So I don't think they're going to make a need pick for a wide receiver unless, if a Dunze, right? He's not a number 7 overall pick, but maybe he is the 14th overall pick if he gets there. But he went to the Texans at number 23, and man, the Texans just get scarier and scarier every time you see him make a pick.
Yeah, to me, at 14, I would definitely consider a Brock Bowers if you're talking wide receiver just because he fills that dual need of the tight end, obviously, and a pass catcher. And I think that would be a great pick at 14.
He's also the only tight end that has come off the board.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
To this point. Ennis Rakestraw Jr. That's a heck of a name. Missouri cornerback going to the Cowboys. Leonard Taylor III, Miami defensive tackle going to the Packers. Then Jordan Morgan, another tackle going to the Bucks.
Yeah, a lot of tackles.
There are a lot of tackles. Chris Braswell, edge rusher, going to the Cardinals. And then Devontae Walker, wide receiver out of North Carolina, going to the Bills. Ladd McConkey, Georgia wide receiver. I don't know if I'm sold on Ladd McConkey as a first round pick, but a lot of people have Ladd McConkey as a first round pick. And I just feel like he's one of those guys who's just like he's played for Georgia for so long that you're just like, yeah, he wins games, and
right.
I just think there's so much talent, and this is why the prospects right now are hard to grade, and this is why the combine and the Senior Bowl is so important because. Georgia wide receivers, it matters who you line up against, and it matters what the defense has to focus on, and what defense is focusing on Ladd McConkey. So can he make plays a lot easier knowing that Brock Bowers is in that offense? Then is he like a first round pick? A first round wide receiver is expected to be a wide receiver 1.
Right?
Is Ladd McConkey a wide receiver 1 in the NFL? I don't know. I mean. You're talking about number 29, so you're talking about a fringe second round pick. So maybe, you're talking about the Chiefs. They can make it work. Pat Mahomes has done a lot more with a lot less. But I don't know. We'll see.
As we round things out here with my first round, it just really surprising. To me, a glaring name left off is Michael Penix.
Michael Penix, yeah, I think he is a second round pick. Bo Nix also didn't go in this mock.
Right, exactly.
So you saw one tight end,
right,
and only 3 quarterbacks. So
I don't think there's any way in hell that happened. I think both Penix and Nix are first rounders.
I don't know. I think once you get past once you get to the late, so one of the issues with getting a quarterback picked late is the teams that pick late are typically teams that don't need a quarterback.
Right, exactly. So you figure maybe someone trades back in.
Yeah, right. That could happen. But the Ravens aren't picking a quarterback. 49ers aren't picking a quarterback. Lions aren't picking a quarterback. Chiefs aren't picking a quarterback. Bills aren't picking a quarterback. Cardinals, now we're back to 27. This is just going back from the end of the draft.
Yeah, right.
Now we're at 27. Cardinals didn't pick a quarterback at 4. I don't think they're picking a quarterback at 27. Bucks made Bucks.
Now you're talking.
Yeah, I could see the Bucks going with a Nix or a Penix here.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's possible they get out. I mean, 2 years ago, I was convinced there wasn't a first round quarterback, and only Kenny Pickett went off. And I don't think anyone still thinks Kenny Pickett is a first round quarterback. So sometimes, everyone wants to convince themselves that the quarterbacks in the draft are good enough, and sometimes they're not. Yeah. Like the best quarterback in that draft was Brock Purdy. So I don't know, but
yeah, and I know obviously the attraction of a first round QB2 is that extra year, but
yeah, but like it's like that fifth year option is so expensive that a lot of times it doesn't make sense to pick it up anyway at quarterback.
No, so it is curious. I just find it pretty amusing that there was only 3 quarterbacks drafted in the first round here.
Yeah, and one of them fell. So yeah, I mean, like I just think it's funny because like 2 years ago, everyone was like convincing themselves, trying to talk themselves into Malik Willis. And like at the Senior Bowl, everyone was like, Malik Willis looks so good.
Well, I feel like a lot of folks are trying to talk J.J. McCarthy into the first round, and I'm like, get out of here. Come on.
Yeah, don't do that. Don't do that to yourself. But no, I think this is interesting, and I kind of like doing it this way because this segment we focused a lot on the first round picks, and we're going to end up talking about a lot of the same players in the next segment, but we can kind of skip a little past them because like I don't need to give you my Rome Odunze take again.
Right.
And then we can get into some of the second round guys, and like Bo Nix, Michael Penix are in the second round of that draft. So that'll be a good way to kind of break up some of the stuff we're talking about. But is anything else you want to note before we move on to the next one?
No, just the fact that obviously, this is our first one, and it does make things difficult, somewhat, off skew when you look at where they have someone like a Jaden Daniels going in this draft, because I just don't believe he gets out the top 5.
Well, we'll see. I mean, that's the thing is like that's where like I think quarterbacks more than any other position are impacted by the combine and some of these pro days, because it's really like you every offense is different, and it's kind of like we talked to this is different but it's similar. Darren Rizzi always says like when you look at kickers in college, like Blake Grupe for instance. It's really not worth looking at their stats because the way you kick in college is completely different than what do you do as an NFL kicker. And like the process is different. Like the coaching isn't as good. The expectations aren't as high. And I think that's kind of like, particularly for the quarterback position, it's a lot more about your processing and how you react to certain situations. And you aren't always presented with those situations in college, and like, so I think that in that, like, and it's part of the process that people don't see. And so I think that's why a lot of times it's not thought of as important as it is, but like those interviews with quarterbacks are hugely important, and sometimes it can talk you out of a guy that you should take, like CJ Stroud, because everyone's talking about his those testing that like second, whatever the test scores and all this. And then he gets to the NFL and it's like, clearly those were not a good indicator of his future success. So we'll see, but I agree. I think Jaden is going to grade out very well in a lot of these things.
Yeah. And like you said, it's going to have to be some kind of serious injury or other, God forbid, legal troubles that suddenly pop up for Daniels that make him fall. It's just don't see that happening.
Or maybe he has little baby hands like Joe Burrow and Pat Mahomes.
Burrow still went 1.
Yeah. Yeah. Although Kenny Pickett might, like, Joe Burrow was so good that it didn't matter. Same with Pat Mahomes, but Kenny Pickett, who I think it was like he wears 2 gloves for a reason, guys. Anyway, all right, let's wrap up this segment. We'll come back. We'll dive into my mock draft, which is first and second round. So we'll spend a bit more time in that one talking about the second round and some guys that I think are interesting. But all right, who dat? This is Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He's Steve Geller. We will be right back. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He's Steve Geller. And to my right, to my left, whichever, I can never tell. I'm looking at myself in a mirrored thing. And to my side here is my mock draft. It looks the same, but it's different. And you can tell from the top that it's different because mine has Caleb Williams going number 1 overall. I also did the second round in this, so we'll spend less time on the first round than we did on Steve's, but we'll spend a little bit more time on the second round. But yeah, so you can see here.
Quite a run on wide receivers there.
Yeah, that was about to say. So Caleb Williams went number 1. Drake May went number 2. I think that's a lot more likely than Drake May going number 1. I think if Caleb Williams doesn't go number 1, it's because the Bears are trading down, and whoever wanted Drake May traded up anyway. But the Patriots don't take a quarterback at number 3. So PFF, Pro Football Focus, does not love Jaden Daniels as much
but they
as
love Mac Jones.
Yes, they do love Mac Jones, and it's interesting because maybe there I do think that there's a possibility that we in Louisiana are more in love with Jaden Daniels than maybe the landscape at large. Obviously he won the Heisman. There's a lot of respect there, but maybe we are overvaluing Jaden Daniels. It's possible. We've all kind of come to terms with the idea that he's going to be a top 3 pick, top 5 pick. Who knows? Maybe we're wrong and we're too close to the project. But going forward, so like you mentioned, in the top 5 of this draft, you see an immediate run on wide receivers. You see Malik Neighbors go number 3 to the Patriots. Dunze goes even higher in this draft, number 4 to the Cardinals. And then Marvin Harrison Jr. goes number 5 to the Chargers. I don't think I've ever seen 3 wide receivers go off the board in the top 5 before. And I don't think you're going to see it this year. So I'm not sure I buy this PFF mock draft, but I think it is interesting. Like, there are years you don't see a wide receiver go off the board until like the mid-20s. And clearly there's a lot of love for these wide receivers. And I understand why. They're all very good.
But I don't believe that this is considered like an elite wide receiver class like we've seen in the floor. That's the past. That's why I'm just surprised to see, especially right here, bam, 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 in the top 5 is pretty outlandish there, PFF. I'm curious. Well,
I do think this isn't so. I think a good year, 2022, was probably the best wide receiver class that I've ever seen, which is a year like Chris Olave, Drake London, Jameson Williams, Jahan Dotson, a few other guys. I think there was 5 wide receivers that came off the board in the first round. This isn't quite as good as that, but I do think this top 3 is as good as it gets. I think Malik Neighbors is legit a top 5 caliber receiver. I have questions about Rome Odunze. We'll see. And Marvin Harrison Jr. I don't think he won the Biletnikoff. I think he's a good example of a guy again like Alad McConkey, like we talked about. It's like, is Marvin Harrison really that good, or is he just playing for Ohio State? And Malik Neighbors, I think I've seen him do it over multiple seasons. Marvin's been very good for a long time too. But we'll see. I just think every year it's like you need at least one Ohio State wide receiver in the top 10. And he's it this year. I think he's going to be very, very good. But I think to me, the only legit top 5 wide receiver is Malik. But again, I'm a homer, so.
No, I'm seeing this too. And right afterward, there's our boy Cooper DeJean again. And I gotta do some more scouting on Iowa football, clearly.
Yeah, I didn't watch much Iowa. I need to talk to Mike Triplett or Jack Heflin, 2 Iowa guys. But no, I have heard about Cooper. Again, it's tough. And but yeah, he top cornerback off the board that's pretty impressive for anybody.
Yeah.
We'll see. And again, these are just like, that's the problem with doing these early mock drafts is I just don't know enough about these guys. Like, I maybe watched one Iowa game all year and I didn't stare at Cooper DeJean the whole time. And defensive backs are tough because if you're really good, people don't throw at you, so you don't even get to see it in a lot of instances. But Joe Alt, again, is the first tackle off the board. Brock Bowers falls here, and the Falcons do the insane thing again and take another tight end rather than a quarterback. And if the only reason I think this is a possibility is because they've done it before with Kyle Pitts, but maybe they want to do that dual tight end thing. I don't know. This mock draft is kind of all over the place. I'm not sure.
I'm seeing that. It's pretty wild.
And then you have Jajon Newton going to number 9 to the Bears, Nate Wiggins, cornerback from Clemson, going to the Jets at 10. Then finally, the Vikings take Jaden Daniels at number 11.
Man.
Now, I would be stunned if he got here, but if he got to 11, again, like I said, if he got to 8, I would be considering trading up to 7. If he's there at number 10 and the Jets aren't planning to pick a quarterback, man, hey, Jets land. You want to trade back? You want to try? You want to see what happens?
Yeah, I would think definitely Mickey's picking up the phone for show.
I mean, they do have Aaron Rodgers, who's definitely going to play for a long time. So maybe they're just tired of drafting quarterbacks, and they're like, we can't do it again. How many times?
Rodgers may last 2 games this coming year. Who knows?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think it's possible, but either way, this one's interesting because again, like you said last time, this draft has Bo Nix going at number 12 to the Broncos,
right?
Which, maybe it's really a question of who Sean Payton loves, right? I could see them drafting a quarterback. I could see them drafting one of these 2 guys. If he drafts Michael Penix, or they're both West Coast guys, so it's like they're in that general area. Maybe they've gotten a good chance to really scout them closer than some other guys, and they like them. We'll see, but I also don't think Sean Payton has a great track record of drafting and developing quarterbacks. So,
yeah, name one.
Exactly. And then this is where it's interesting because you have all of these skill position players. A cornerback, tight end, 3 wide receivers, and Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix, which pushes down all of these tackles to right where you are. And so that allowed me to go get Taliesin Fuaga out of Oregon State. Now, again, it's like this early in the process, I don't really have a strong opinion between these 3 guys. There's 3 tackles in a row here. You have Alumiua, Fashanu, Taliesin Fuaga, and J.C. Latham. The only one I'm sure I'm saying correctly is J.C. Latham. And I would be fine with, like, to me, this is an idea pick. It's not necessarily this is the for sure better option. Right. But if I get to this point and I have 2 of the top 4 tackles available to me, I'm picking one of them. And I'm saying, thank you, Sean Payton, for taking Bo Nix instead of a guy who's going to have to protect him. Thank you, Atlanta, for taking a tight end instead of the offensive line or the quarterback. Thank you, Minnesota, for taking Jaden in 11. Like I'm just saying I desperately need an offensive tackle, and I get my pick of 2 of the top 5 on the board, and I'm happy about it. So that's why I went with that pick.
It's kind of funny too in this mock, the guys with the 2 tough names to say are back to back again.
Yes. I need to learn how to say Alumia.
Sounds like you're doing it right. Yeah, I have but like Fashanu.
Yeah, I mean that should be pretty straightforward. Fashanu or Fashanu. We'll find out. This is early in the process. We have to see how Bobby pronounces these names.
Oh yeah.
All right, let's just go quickly through the rest of the first round. Jared Verse. So Jared Verse was on the board, and I was tempted, but I just see the offensive tackle need as glaring.
Yeah, I get it.
If you're in love with Jared Verse and you want to go with him, that's great. But you can rush the passer all you want. If you can't protect your own, it's going to be a long year. Khalid McKinstry to the Rams at 19. Terrion Arnold to the Steelers at 20. Chris Braswell to the Dolphins.
Alabama players
at 21. Yeah, nice 3 Alabama players in a row here. Marius Mims, tackle, goes to the Eagles. Braylon Trice, edge rusher, goes to the Texans. Kamari Lassiter goes to the Cowboys. Brian Thomas Jr., again, this is about the same, to the Packers at 25. Troy Franklin, wide receiver, goes to the Bucks. There's Ennis Rakestraw, goes to the Cardinals. Jordan Morgan, tackle, goes to the Bills at 28. Devontae Walker to the Chiefs at 29. Then a couple others, no one super notable. Cameron Kitchens, Graham Barton, Jonah Ellis off the board, final 3. So yeah, any thoughts before we move on to the second round?
No, just seeing here again too, very tackle heavy.
Yes. I mean, that's what you get. That's why the tackle position is so hard to rebuild, because it's so rare that you find a starting tackle on day 2 or 3. Right. It's so difficult to do because there's only so many 315, 320 pound guys who can run around that exist, not just like that play the NFL, that exist on the planet. Like there's just not that many of them. And when you find them, you draft them early. So I just like, that's why I feel like maybe you do need to add a piece of maybe you do need to add a piece at edge rusher, but I feel like I can do that in the second round. I don't feel like I can find a starting caliber offensive tackle in the second round. Maybe you trade back because there are a handful of these tackles. Maybe you have a really high grade on a Jordan Morgan at Arizona, right? Or Graham Barton.
But Mickey even joked. When the hell has he traded back?
Yeah, I don't think he ever has. I don't think he ever has. But it is interesting because you don't have a third round pick this year. And so maybe you do, if you can get an extra second or even a third, drop back a couple spots and still feel like you can get the value on a guy. I would love for the Saints to do that. I think they should do that, but I don't think they will. All right, let's go over to the second round.
Dun.
I don't have the full second round here, but I have, everything up to where the Saints pick.
Right.
And so, we talked about him. We talked about Ladd McConkey. He goes off the board first to the Panthers, number 33 overall. He can learn at the feet of Adam Thielen. Sure. Leonard Taylor, Quinion Mitchell, Keon Coleman, first 4 off the board. Safety Tyler Nubin. And this is where, when I talked about this, I think slot corner is a huge need for the Saints. I really want to see them go into this draft and just go scout a guy who can play the slot and draft a guy who can play the slot like you did with CJ and make that his home. Make him own that position, right? And so that's what I'm looking at in this draft. That's what I want to do in this draft. It's still too early to really get an idea of who that might be. So I went with the obvious pick, but we'll go. So wide receiver Keon Coleman, Florida State. There's some interesting wide receiver options. Adonai Mitchell out of Texas goes to the Titans at 38. He might be a guy you're interested in. Michael Penix goes at 39 to the Giants. So if you are in love with Michael Penix, you maybe be able to get him in the second round, but that's a tough scenario. I don't know. Kalen King, cornerback out of Penn State, goes to the Commanders. You're getting close to your pick now. Another tackle goes to the Packers, Kieran Amagaji. Kalen Bullock, safety, goes to the Vikings. J.J. McCarthy, another quarterback off the board. The Falcons finally picked their quarterback, and it's J.J. McCarthy.
Good luck with that. Yeah,
like you haven't learned your lesson with Desmond Ridder. Just like go draft a quarterback in the first round or stop talking to me about it. TJ Tampa, a guy who I was interested in for the Saints, although not a slot guy, goes off at 44. Yeah, but I think it's this is where you kind of you're splitting the difference of college slot cornerbacks don't necessarily translate to NFL slot cornerbacks. So I think a big part of this process in finding a slot corner is not necessarily going and finding the best college slot corner. It's finding the best corner who can play the slot.
Yeah, I understand.
But for this pick, I'm just reaching for Mike Sanders still, Michigan cornerback. He's won a ton of games. You've seen him. He's played against the top competition, right? And he is a tried and true slot cornerback. I know, like from an athletic perspective, it's tougher. He's a little small for a slot guy. He can move, but I don't know if he tackles in space well enough. He does cover. He can get upfield. He can blitz. But he is like, if you're looking for the prospects that have played slot corner and succeeded in the slot, he's probably the best guy. Now, PFF gave me an F on this pick because PFF has him rated around number 80. But I don't feel too bad about that because I'm pretty sure they gave me an F on Isaiah Foskey when I took him last year. And so now, is that the right pick? I don't know. Are the Saints willing to reach for a guy in the second round that they think is a scheme fit and really like and has won a bunch of games? Yes. You did it last year. So I feel fine about that. Like, I don't think my issue is not like, oh, PFF isn't giving me a good grade. I think personally, that is one of the issues I have with mock drafts is that people try to get an A grade when PFF doesn't have any clue what they're talking about when it comes to individual teams. They're just grading based off their own board and whether you took a guy who they had seen as a higher value.
Right.
So like their grades don't really matter. They're just telling me that I picked Mike Sanders still about 40 picks earlier than they thought he should have been picked. But the Saints don't have a third rounder. So if you feel like this is a guy you really like, you don't have the luxury of saying like, well, maybe he's still there when we pick next time. No, you're not picking again until the 4th round unless you trade up. Now I will say they have probably two or three 5th round picks coming in the comp pick formula. They might have a 4th round pick if it goes a certain way, but so you could potentially package a bunch of those. I wouldn't be surprised if they package those comp picks, maybe a future pick, and try to move into the 3rd round because, we've seen the Saints be very successful in the 3rd round of drafts. But I'm not, we're not going down that road right here. So right here, I'm just picking the guy I feel really good about playing in the slot, and saying, good, these are my 2 biggest needs, and I filled them.
No, you mentioned the slot, and obviously that's something I hope this team is out to address, because we've seen the experiment with Alontae Taylor is just not happening. He's got to play outside, and then obviously that makes you wonder, are they going to move Marshawn Lattimore? Because I don't think it's Adebo that's going to be hitting the road. So do you have now Adebo and Taylor on the outside? And then who knows, maybe you get some obviously draft picks for Lattimore.
You wouldn't be getting him for this year. If you're trading Marshawn, it'll be after June 1st.
Okay.
Because you would
the cap hit.
Yeah, it's just an easier scenario if you hold on to him. Let me look it up really quick.
I was going to say that makes it really interesting too, because you would figure folks on draft time would be interested in wheeling and dealing for him.
Yeah, they would, but at the same time, it just doesn't make sense. It would cost you $30 million in dead cap to trade him prior to June 1st.
Yeah, that's not happening.
$30 million.
Yeah, that's no drop in the bucket, obviously.
No. Now, if you trade him after June 1st, your dead cap for 2024 is $13 million. And then you would have a big dead cap hit coming in 2025, but you can stomach that a little bit more because it's not hitting you all this year, and so you can plan for it. And to me, that's the most likely scenario. It does get a bit confusing with the option bonus, and you can trade that, and I do think it dumps that number down a little bit. But you're talking about a 28-year-old corner, and I think teams I think cornerback is going to be a position that starts to be viewed from a financial perspective a lot more like the running back position, where you're looking at guys who are about 28, 29 and no longer seeing them as in their prime. And like people are saying, oh, you have prime Marshawn Lattimore, but 28, 29 is where you start to see cornerbacks really start to flag. Not as abruptly as running backs, but it's noticeable. And Marshawn is still playing at a high level, but these last 2 years you've got these injuries, and it's like, man, if you've had to make do without him, and you've proven that you can. You played some of your best football the last year without him. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how that goes, but one way or another, I want to get better in the slot, and we'll see. But yeah, you're now trading Adebo. You're going to extend Adebo. And so this is kind of where I'm approaching it with this. I'm kind of approaching this mock draft as expecting that they trade Marshawn. Now they might not.
And I think we kind of talked about it a little. There are maybe some in-house options like a Yadam or, someone else that could end up filling that slot role.
Yadam's not a slot corner. Ugo, maybe.
Yeah.
You might say, hey, Tyron, we're going to add a safety and have him more involved in the slot. I don't know. But again, my approach for this draft and why I went the way I did in this mock draft is because I miss CJ Gardner-Johnson, right? A guy,
for sure.
And it's funny because it's tough because you look at corners here and it's not always a corner that make the best slot corners. A lot of times it's safeties, which CJ Gardner-Johnson was a safety.
Exactly.
But he never played safety. He played slot corner. So, safeties oftentimes are better tacklers, so like that's a big part of the market that I have not really looked at closely yet. So that could be another name, but I'm going need in this draft. I get it. You want to go best player available, but sometimes need trumps value in my opinion.
Well, and you mentioned with safety, to me, safety / slot is definitely a need.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that'd be interesting. Yeah, to delve into, draft, all the information and just see who could who could make that shift from safety to the slot, because that does make a lot of sense, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah. And now it doesn't have to be a lunatic like CJ.
They would help.
Maybe it does help. I guess you have to be kind of a crazy person to want to cover tight ends all day and run up and make tackles on 220-pound running backs.
No, and of course, I'm not saying he did anything fantastic in that game, the divisional round game for Detroit, but guess what? Right place, right time kind of guy, and was there for the interception. Of course, it was CJ Gardner-Johnson. And then he goes and taunts Baker Mayfield. You got to love it.
That's what you got to do. You got to be that guy.
Yeah.
But man. All right, that's it. That's all I got here. Let's wrap up this podcast. Every time I come on and say, let's keep it close to 45 minutes this time, because that's what our goal is every time, is 15-minute segments, but it always ends up being 3 half-hour segments. Some kind of
alerts or alarms, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm never going to just stop talking when the time is up. It's a gift and a curse. But all right, thanks everyone who got all the way to the end. Appreciate it. This is our initial mock draft. Again, these are going to change significantly. It's kind of just a jumping off point. So we'll go from there. But this is 1.0. Thanks for everyone for listening. As we go forward, obviously we got the Senior Bowl coming up next week. I'll be driving out on Tuesday. We'll record an episode on Monday, and I think that'll be a good day to kind of get into, what are some names to watch? What are some guys I'm looking at up there that particularly close to, a couple of years ago it was Trevor Penning, and there's always going to be, Isaiah Foskey was there last year. There's always going to be guys. So
there's juniors there for the first time this year now, right?
I believe so.
It's kind of weird, the Senior Bowl, but now juniors are allowed. I'm like, what?
Yeah, there's going to be so many. Bo Nix and Michael Penix are both there.
Yeah.
Which, I think this is a good year to really look at the quarterbacks, because I think those guys are fringe. Those are the guys that you could take a shot at. So
legitimate possibilities without making a huge move, right?
Last year there was no one. Last year it was Clayton Tune and Jake Hayner, I guess, was there, but no one you're really looking at closely.
Michael Pratt will be there.
Michael Pratt will be there. Yeah, I am. A lot of people are giving him a second round grade, which
wow,
surprising. I like Michael Pratt, but
right, that seems a bit extreme as well. But we'll see what happens. Yeah. But the QB market, as we know from draft to salaries, is ridiculous and unpredictable.
Yeah, and I don't think we'll hear from Mickey this year, but I wouldn't be surprised if maybe Michael Parrington talks. It'll be interesting because last year was Jeff Ireland, but I don't know
his future.
Maybe Jeff might have a new job by that point.
Right.
So who knows? We'll see. But
dun dun dun. Stay tuned.
That'll be good. Yeah, I imagine Monday's episode we'll be going through what's the have they hired an offensive coordinator? So we'll see. A lot of my plans get preempted by the Saints doing stuff.
Yeah, hopefully we got something more to talk about too on that front. If it's another interview or they've narrowed it down and they've got their man in their sights.
Right. Well, all right. Thanks, y'all. Again, this is Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He is Steve Geller. Thanks, everyone who hung out. If you have any questions, comments, whatever, hit me up on Twitter at Jeff_Nowak. You can hit up Steve at Steve Geller WWL. Is there anyone you want us to look at the Senior Bowl? Let me know. It's always fun to just go through this list of names and be like, well, I think that guy's interesting. I think that guy's interesting. And then they just look terrible. So
just get ready for your peanut butter cup fix.
What does that mean?
Reese's Senior Bowl. All the peanut butter cups.
I have never gotten a peanut butter cup at the Senior Bowl.
Oh man, I thought it was part of the gift bag.
I've never gotten a gift bag.
Dang, you got to go to the media center.
Apparently. I just hope it doesn't rain. Last year was just raining the entire time. Or maybe not. Maybe was that last year? Maybe it was 2 years ago. It was raining the entire time. I don't know. It's all blending together. We'll see. It is funny because the weather is so 2 years ago it was freezing cold, and then last year it was hot. I got a sunburn. And I remember the first day I brought a jacket assuming it would be cold, and it was 85 degrees and I was sweating. You never know. It's the South, baby.
No, you really don't know what you're going to get in the South with the weather. So, yeah, Godspeed, and hopefully it's good viewing because, yeah, nobody wants to be out there in the cold or the wet.
Agreed. Cold sucks. Doesn't make sense. Why would you live in it?
Man.
This is Inside Black and Gold. Thanks, everyone. Who dat? Go Saints.
Boil your water, black and gold fans. Boil your water.
No. Bye.